polyamory and open relating is really new for a lot of people. It touches so many wounds and programming. Like people really believe, like people have seen their parents maybe go through a divorce because of cheating or witnessed infidelity growing up. I mean, like there's a lot of deep pain associated with being in a relationship and having sex with another person.
Hello, friend, and welcome to the Sex Upgraded podcast, a podcast for men all about sex, where we'll combine real, authentic, and down-to-earth conversations about sex, life, and relationships with some pretty wild personal stories and practical how-to episodes as well, with guest experts from around the world to help you have the most amazing sex life you can possibly have. My name is Taylor, and I'll be your host on this journey, and it's my goal with each episode to give you practical, actionable things you can start doing today to improve your sex life and your entire life, because a thriving sex life will help you thrive in all areas of your life. So let's begin today's episode by starting with a deep breath in through the nose into the belly together. Exhaling with an audible sigh. And let's get into today's episode. So I recently asked a question on my personal Facebook account to the world and said, hey, my podcast has reached 150 plus countries and there's been thousands and thousands of people listening, and I'd love to do some more in-person interviews with people in Asheville. Does anybody have an interesting topic about sex or relationship that they thought they could bring to the table? And I'm here today with Juno. Juno, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And Juno messaged me and said, hey, let's talk about polyamory. And I'm really excited for this conversation because, Juno, to my knowledge, you are not a coach. You're not an educator. You're not somebody who's trying to sell any particular idea, but you're somebody who's actually living this lifestyle.
Yeah.
And you're just excited to talk about it. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, at this moment, I'm not doing anything related to that in terms of my career. Cool. Yeah, it's just something I want to share about. And I've thought about like making a video at times. I don't really have a personal YouTube, and haven't really had the motivation to start something like that on a big scale. So it hasn't come about, but I'm really glad to be here to, share on your platform. So.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. And I think maybe this is either your first or one of your first podcast interviews ever.
Yeah. I think it's officially my my third.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've done two others throughout my life, but it's been a really long time.
Awesome. Well, thank you for showing up. Sometimes it can feel a little awkward to sit and talk into a microphone, especially when there's cameras around, but thanks for doing that. A number of people have told me since I started telling my friend group that we're doing an interview, they've said like, oh, Juno's a great person to talk to about poly. Yeah. She's got a lot of good things to say. And so
that's good to hear.
I'm excited and intrigued to see where we go with this conversation.
Me too.
But first, we'll start with a question. What is polyamory?
Oh my gosh. What a big question.
Yeah, a big question. Or can you just share a little bit about your personal relationship situation?
Great. Which one should I do?
Let's start with, since this is actually less of a, here's how to do this thing. It's more of like a personal conversation. Yeah. What is your relationship? Do you have multiple partners? Are you dating one person? Are you not? Are you single? Like what's happening right now?
Cool. I think I kind of prefer saying that I'm non-monogamous as a statement, as opposed to saying polyamorous, although I identify with that word and I feel like I am polyamorous too. So I'm not poly, but I think that, sometimes the labels, people attach a lot of things to these concepts or project a lot of things onto them. And it's really so individual, like what it means to each person. So I hesitate to say that I'm open or poly, even though I am, but I'll just start with saying I'm non-monogamous. So I practice a non-monogamous lifestyle. And I first started exploring that when I was 19, actually. And I was in a polyamorous relationship with two other people. And then I was in multiple monogamous relationships throughout my 20s. That was like my intro to non-monogamy. And I read a lot of books at that time, and like it really opened my mind. And it's been a part of my inner exploration for a long time. But about 5 years ago, after I ended a monogamous relationship ended, I decided I was going to really commit to that as a lifestyle, and that it resonated the most for me. And I wasn't always sure like what version of non-monogamy I wanted. And I'm really still discovering that. And I feel like it's an ongoing discovery, and it's not something we have to like put a stamp on and say, I am this version of that. But I feel pretty confident and clear that some version of non-monogamy is what resonates for me. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I've been doing that for about 5 years, and or maybe close to 6 at this point. And that started as an individual choice when I was not in a partnership. So that was really empowering for me to like enter into the dating world with that as a kind of self-chosen, relationship orientation.
Absolutely.
Rather than something that kind of came about suddenly.
You're in a relationship and you're like, oh, I think I'm actually polyamorous.
Yeah. Oh shit.
Oof, dun, dun.
Yeah. So yeah. And currently, I'm in a relationship. I've been in a partnership with my primary partner, or I currently have one primary partner. We're open to having other primary partners, but currently I have one. And we've been together for almost 3 years, and we live together. I've had other partners. Most of them have been like more short term. I've had, like 3 months, and then we've had other lovers and those sorts of things. So currently I don't have like multiple, what I would consider more primary or like deep-rooted partnerships, but I am actively dating, and so is my partner.
Nice. You're open to it.
We are open to it.
Deeper relationships versus just like flings and that sort of thing.
Correct. Yeah.
Got it. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that's the context. That's the context. And I'm curious, so we had a conversation before this conversation just to talk about talk about what we're going to talk about. And one of the things that you said in that conversation that you get asked a lot is, why polyamory? Yeah. And I'm curious. So after those relationships 5 or 6 years ago, what inspired the decision to try something different?
After the monogamous relationships that I was in.
Yeah. What inspired this journey into doing something that most of society says is weird?
Yeah. I think that early relationship that I spoke about, that early polyamorous relationship that I was in, and when I started reading those books, it made a lot of sense to me on a deep level. It struck something in me like that just made sense. And I never had really thought about, like, it's just assumed in our culture that you get married and then you just, you stay with that one person, or you're only with one person at a time. Like monogamy is kind of implied, it feels like in most cultures, in our culture. So it was always just an implied, assumed behavior that I had never really even been given the opportunity to question. So when that situation arose, and I happened to be with people who were all really curious and open-minded, and this was at a time when, like, nowadays poly is kind of trending. Like it was not a thing back then. Yeah. And people were like, what are you talking about? This is crazy. This is weird. Or they just were like,
what's wrong with you? Like, why aren't you able to have a normal relationship? Would they ask you things like that?
I feel like people just avoided it. Like it was an uncomfortable thing that I was doing. And so I remember friendships at the time, people just thinking it was strange and maybe not wanting to be friends with me anymore, or acting really awkward if I would bring it up. So I kind of just didn't talk about it that much. Yeah. But it struck me on just like a philosophical level, like when I really thought about what makes sense for me and what I really, if I really had the choice, what I would like. And So that always kind of stuck, but then I think the societal resistance comes into play, the programming, my own fears and jealousies, and then meeting people who really weren't open to it too. So I would bring it up early on. I would be like, what do you think about open relationships? What do you think about non-monogamy?
You mean on friendships or in dates or all of the above?
I'm speaking specifically about the relationships I got into, the longer term monogamous. I was in 2 longer term monogamous relationships. And in both of those, it was a part of the conversation at different points, or I would bring it up and both of them were not open to it. And I don't remember I remember dating at times and people not being open to it also. So it was a big change for me when I came to Asheville, and there's a lot more people practicing some version of non-monogamy. And I think that's really expanding in the world in general.
Yeah.
But definitely here in Asheville, there's a lot more movement in that area.
For sure. I mean, over the past few years, I've seen front page stories on the mainstream news networks about non-monogamy and polyamory and studies coming out, TV shows about it. I was featured on an old documentary with Kenya, the person who we were talking earlier today, who was in a previous podcast episode about how to divorce proof your marriage. Myself and a poly V, 2 other people that we were in relationship with, were featured in a documentary years ago. I think maybe in a similar time when you first started doing this.
Yeah.
And people were like, what the fuck? What's wrong with these people? They're Satanists, they're sinners, they're bad. Something's wrong with them. They probably have a mental disorder, like all of this stuff, you know.
Right. You just haven't found the right person yet. People say that a lot. Right. Yeah. When you
totally. And so it's interesting to see, now it's really starting to be talked about, you know, and there's research that has come out in the past decade too, that I did some research before this interview just to come up with some data points. And there's research out there that shows people in non-monogamous relationships are as happy, if not actually more happy than people in monogamous relationships, which is really interesting to me. And then looking at the different marriage statistics, I'm just going to read off a couple here right now. 40 to 50% generally 50% of first marriages fail or end in divorce, you could say. 65% of second marriages end in divorce, and more than 70% of any marriage beyond that ends in divorce.
Wow.
And then another interesting thing about that is, let's see, where is it? Roughly half of people say they feel fulfilled in their marriage. And so that's half of the half that didn't get divorced. So we're looking at, maybe a 25% rate of people who are actually happy in their monogamous marriages.
Right.
And then I looked up what's the biggest cause of divorce. And there's some research about this too. And in some studies, and one meta-analysis I found, they said 60% of the people who got a divorce cited infidelity as the reason for getting divorced. Yeah. And I'm like, what if you could just do that as part of your relationship?
And it was okay.
Would you need to get a divorce? Like, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. So all that stuff it's head scratchy to me.
Very much so. Yes.
Yeah. And there's a list, just five more bullet points. When people say, what causes marriage dissatisfaction? There's a lack of spontaneity, a lack of romance, a terrible sex life, lack of time to give each other attention, lack of time to talk. Number 4 and number 5 are kind of like, that makes sense. But the first 3, I think, could be inspired by some form of non-monogamy as well.
Say the first 3 one more time.
Lack of spontaneity.
Spontaneity.
Lack of romance.
Right.
And then a terrible sex life.
Right.
So those are things that could potentially be impacted by opening up the relationship in some way. And there are actually some people out there who feel like an increase in their sexual appetite if they connect with somebody else and then bring that back to you could call it a primary relationship or other relationship.
That's been my experience personally. Yeah, I think it increases all of those things, not just personally or with your new relationships, but in whatever relationships are also existing. Yeah, the new energy or the refreshing energy or the unique experience refreshes everything. It also refreshes the other relationships if you're able to really integrate that and have it all feel connected and let it change you, and then let that change inspire your existing relationships. So
and it's all talked about, it's all consensual. There's nothing under the table happening.
It's celebrated. Yeah. So the why question, why polyamory? I think all of those things are things I researched at one point or another, or maybe read in books, and made sense to me when I thought about wanting to have really long-term relationships that are fulfilling. Not just a relationship that is secure and will meet my needs for some kind of safety in the world, although that's great too.
Yeah.
But something that's like truly fulfilling and inspiring to me. I felt like non-monogamy would solve a lot of those problems, or be a pathway that would be more fulfilling.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I personally resonate with that as well, too. And if you're listening right now and you are monogamous, I do want to say it's not my intention to try to convince you to be non-monogamous. Really, my intention and desire in this conversation is just to talk about another possibility and why somebody might want to go down this other path, because there are not as many resources out there for this kind of thing. Like, we're not living in a societal context that says, here's how to be non-monogamous. Pretty much everything about society is like monogamy, 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 and it's slowly starting to open up a little bit right now.
Yes. Yeah, I echo that, and I totally agree. And I personally don't have anything against monogamy, or I don't think that monogamy is inherently a poor choice or inherently leads to any of those issues either. I think people can be fulfilled and be monogamous. And I've seen that too. So it's really just, I think it's opening up just the scope of what's possible, and that you have options, and your relationship can really be designed any way that you want. And I think that's, for me, the message that I resonate with the most, more so than, am I monogamous? Am I poly? It's like, it's more like open, in the sense of you're open to design a relationship based on your unique situation and needs and preferences, and in your own creative capacity. And you can create your own rules in a relationship. So and maybe that looks like monogamy to traditional culture, but it could have some important edits that you might carry over from looking into non-monogamous lifestyles.
Totally. And potentially the exploration of non-monogamy might help you have a more fulfilled monogamous relationship. Like, in my experience, so I'm in a 3-year relationship right now, and we have been mostly monogamous intentionally for the first couple of years of our relationship. We both had come from different polyamorous styles beforehand, and we decided we really want a couple of years of building a solid foundation and work on some important things in our life before we start to expend some of the energy that it might take to be open. Right. And that was really nice, because we built a really solid foundation in our relationship. And just now we're starting to talk about, what are some different things we can explore? And we're slowly starting to wade back into those waters. And it's from a more intentional place, I think, than, we read a couple books about polyamory, let's try it. Which we did in the past too. Which we both did individually in different relationships, and ended interestingly. But I think that's a necessary part of the journey as well for many people.
Yes. Yeah. There's a lot of, I don't want to say failures, but hiccups along the way.
Yeah. One thing, so I do want to talk about, we're going to talk about jealousy and compersion and polyfuckery, like when polyamory goes wrong, and why a lot of the people have bad names or bad feelings about polyamory. Yeah. And you mentioned the words, wanted people to know what's possible, earlier. And I think it's interesting to be sitting here with you right now. One of the meta reasons is because a lot of people, when they hear guys talk about polyamory, they think, the guy just wants to fuck a whole lot of women, Right. And like, here I am with a woman who's saying, actually, this is a lifestyle that feels really good and natural for me. It doesn't sound to me like you're trying to go out and fuck as many people as you can. And if you were, that wouldn't necessarily be wrong. But this is a story a lot of people have about polyamory, especially for guys, versus that it's actually, there's a desire to have meaningful connection with other people too.
Yes. Thank you for speaking to that. I think that is a common conception that people have. And there's a stereotype about that, and that might be true in a lot of cases. But that is not true in my case, and in a lot of cases. And I think that assumption kind of can keep people from looking deeper at it. So yeah, I get that a lot. I get if people hear that I'm open or non-monogamous, I get people kind of asking, is that what he wanted? Like kind of with this sympathetic, like, are you okay? Were you pressured into this? And I've had people really, I feel, almost disbelieve me, like not believe me when I tell them, no, actually, I feel this is really natural for me. And I came into this relationship with this preference. And in a lot of ways, I was more insistent about it even than my partner when we first started. And that's definitely the image that we're given in media and in movies, is that men want to sleep around and men tend to cheat on their wives and partners, and women are more monogamous and committed and, devoted and loyal. So that's an interesting thing to unpack.
Which is statistically, it's actually much more even.
Right, more balanced than people make it seem.
And I'm not trying to say that there aren't guys out there who abuse the word polyamory and try to fuck as many people as they can without good communication. Like that's definitely happening. We're just showing.
And women. Men and women.
Totally.
Yeah, it can definitely be a guise for kind of sex addiction or a way to maybe normalize something that might on a deeper level be kind of a imbalance or a trauma way of relating, trauma-based way of relating, or kind of a way to like avoid looking at more avoidant patterns or other relationship issues, like, I'll just be poly and kind of hop around.
Yeah, and never have to face my own shit.
Yeah, and never really go deep.
Yeah.
And have to look at stuff. So, I think people have had a lot of experiences like that. And it's important to understand that does happen and it can happen, but that's not the case in all non-monogamous configurations. And hopefully we're moving in a direction culturally where people can have that in a way that's like healthy and sustainable. That's what I'm trying to do anyway in my relationship.
Yeah. Thank you for helping to pave the way.
Trying my
best.
This
conversation. When we talked beforehand, you used the word polyfuckery. And we're living in Asheville. And I think you said something to the effect of, well, there's a lot of polyfuckery around here. And a lot of people have had a lot of really bad experiences with polyamory. And I think it's useful to create the distinction between, like, that's not polyamory, period. That's a certain subset of people acting in a certain way, creating certain results. And there's another way to do it. But I wonder if there's anything else you want to say about the polyfuckery piece. Like, why do you think it gets a bad name, polyamory?
Gosh. I think that I hear it a lot from women that I speak, that in particular that I talk to around town, who maybe have had negative experiences with poly, or they'll speak about it in kind of this negative light. And I guess it's come up with some guys too who have dated more poly women in a similar way, where it feels like the person is very detached and really not providing a lot of like grounded presence. And then there can kind of be like using the idea of polyamory as an excuse for every behavior thing or every conflict, or like, well, I'm poly, so you really can't put these expectations on me, or so I think a lot of it is a lack of maybe clear communication and not clearly communicating what people are available for when they say that they're poly. And that goes on both ends, I think, too.
Totally.
Like people have, like we said, you asked, what is polyamory? I'm like, well, that could mean so many things to so many different people. So what one person considers poly is going to be totally different, what their vision is for what poly is. And that's where I think having like a deeper, more kind of grounded conversation, I think for relationships in general, when you're starting to date, but also especially maybe in polyamory, to get really clear on like, well, what is your vision for that? What does that look like for you? I actually, when I first started dating more seriously in poly, I downloaded a worksheet, open relationship worksheet that I got on one of the programs I took. I did joined a group, and I've done some, study. I mean, that's another thing. It's like, we need to study because we didn't really get that information and get those examples, like you said. And so people just kind of fall into it without realizing how complex and hard it can be. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the problems. But
if I can paraphrase just a couple things you just said, it sounds like communication up front is super, super important. And this is probably a reason a lot of people end up having train wrecks, and they'll use, I'm poly, so therefore my emotional availability doesn't matter, or like, I don't need to help support you in this way, or like, you can't count on me for X, Y, and Z, or it makes all my other behaviors excusable.
Yes.
Something like that. So that's in addition to communication. There's like a leveling up that needs to happen in terms of just relational abilities, I would say. But then on both sides and all sides of the spectrum, like I think we all need to be talking more in the beginning of relationships, like short-term or long-term, about what is it that we're actually doing here? Like, what do we actually want? And then from that clarity up front, that can help avoid a lot of the potential pitfalls afterwards.
Yeah.
Right. If we're really clear on what we want, then maybe it's okay if somebody's not so emotionally available for a week after a date. If we know that up front, like that's much better than having sex with somebody and then thinking they're going to be available, but they're actually not, and you never talked about it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I hesitate to imagine that there are many people that are good with that are actually, who are like basically healthy or secure, that are okay with no emotional connection after a sexual relationship. But maybe, I'm not saying it's not, but at least it could be communicated, and that would be a step. And then it's really on them.
Totally. I like the conversation format idea. On my website, there is a guide. I call it the better sex conversation, but it also just applies to relationship building if you're going on a date. So I'll link to that in the show notes for anybody who's curious, near the top, if you want an idea of a conversation format to follow.
Yeah,
I think it's super useful and really important.
And I can include the worksheet too. I can send it to you so people can check that out. I did it with my partner and in the beginning of a relationship. And it details a lot of specific questions about open relationships. Like, how do you feel about being intimate with another partner in front of your partners? Or would you rather to be more neutral or friendly? Those kinds of specifics. It's like, wow, if you knew that ahead of time, how much heartache and frustration and pain could that prevent in knowing how we each relate differently? So just one more thing I want to say about the polyfuckery aspect is like, if we're kind of going to poly, like, wow, this is awesome, we can all just, have sex with whoever we want, and it's so open and free. Without really getting really clear and specific and realizing like, this is really delicate territory. Like relationships are delicate territory. And polyamory and open relating is really new for a lot of people. It touches so many wounds and programming of like, people really believe, like people have seen their parents maybe go through a divorce because of cheating or witnessed infidelity growing up. I mean, like there's a lot of deep pain associated with being in a relationship and having sex with another person.
Totally. And
even if it's all out on the table and we all agree it's okay, those things, those wounds, those unconscious patterns can get triggered. And so this is like deep stuff to be dealing with. And I think that what I observe when I think of that word, or when I hear people speak of poly in a way that's like, wow, that was a terrible experience, is there's this kind of free flowing, like liberated person or idealization of it. But then when the reality hits, the tools aren't there to deal with really what gets brought up. And then if people are also kind of avoidant or don't have relationship skills, like conflict resolution skills and whatnot, and then they just dip or things rupture during those polyamorous excursions, then things can feel really painful and people can feel really wounded or traumatized by the experience. And they can feel like, wow, that person just wanted to sleep with me. And then when it got hard, they're just gone. and they say, well, I'm poly, so
it's fine.
it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Vomit. Yeah. So I'm really hearing there's a need for a deeper understanding and respect and even reverence for the reality of what relationship is, even
Yeah.
short-term relationships.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that's something that is crucially important that we're not doing. Like when I say we, I mean like as a society, generally speaking, like we're not focusing on that. And it's so easy. We can get distracted by 10 million things a day. Like why would we ever pay attention to the reality of the depth of the potential of relationship? But
Right.
as anybody who's even been monogamous in a relationship for longer than a year knows, like it's not all sunshine and roses all the time. And eventually shit comes up. And then when you add multiple other people in there, that potential increases.
Yes.
But
For sure.
That doesn't mean it's not worth doing though.
I agree. I think that there are a lot of hard things that are worth doing, and polyamory or open relating is one of those things for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you never get jealous anymore? Are you
Never.
beyond jealousy?
No, I'm kidding. Yeah, jealousy. I think that what actually comes up for me more than jealousy, and I think it's what people mean often when they say jealousy, is fear and insecurity. So fear of losing the relationship, or insecurity about my value or worth in the relationship. I equate jealousy more to a feeling of like, here's a little cute example. So my partner went to Burning Man last year. I didn't go with him. And he had some sweet connections there, and he met someone. He was telling me about it. And he said, yeah, she taught me how to salsa dance. And I was like, ooh, I got a little jealous because I really felt like he hadn't been open to partner dancing stuff with me. And so I was jealous of that person's influence or ability to get him to partner dance with her when he hadn't been open to that with me.
So the jealousy is pointing to a desire for connection that you have, plus some sadness potentially around that not getting met, maybe plus a thought that he should do that with you. Sure,
exactly. Maybe yeah. All those things. But I think I share that. I'll usually share that. And then he can either say, well, I would love to do that with you. Like, let's do that. Or just listen compassionately. And sometimes I'll just say like, I don't need you to do that with me. I just recognize that came up, and like, maybe it's okay that this person, for whatever reason, and the way they approached it, maybe the way they said it, sparked something or inspired him in a way that I hadn't, and to just celebrate that actually and be like, cool, like that was brought out in you by that person. Yeah. So jealousy in that way, I would say, is pretty minimal for me at this point.
Was it always minimal? Did it take some work to get there?
Oh, no. And I would say it was always way more intense in a monogamous relationship for me. And this was part of the reasons that I was like really curious to experiment with open relating. I thought I have a suspicion that jealousy will be easier for me. And in a weird way it is. So in
an open relationship.
Yeah. Because in a monogamous relationship, if somebody would kind of show up in the scene and I would sense that there was chemistry between them and my partner, I would sense my partner feeling a draw towards that person. There was this knowing and understanding that if they pursued that and they really wanted to go in that direction, that meant our relationship was over. And so I would compare myself and worry if they have more things than I do, because it's a competition. There's only one person that's going to fill that role in a monogamous relationship. So there's no room. We can't just expand or change forms. I mean, we could have, but in that agreement structure of monogamy, I remember when that feeling would come up, it feeling so intense. So for me, just the knowing that it doesn't change my relationship. It doesn't have to end it, or really, and through time and experience, realizing it doesn't change my relationship. If anything, it grows it and improves it.
So you now have an embodied understanding that when your partner dates or has sex with other people, it doesn't actually damage your relationship with him.
Right.
But sometimes it actually improves it and makes it stronger.
Yeah. And that's been my experience. And I know that's not everyone's experience. Some people have opened up and they've found that, it destroyed the existing relationship, or that relationship ended at that point, or it brought up issues that were already there. And that kind of goes down to like, okay, well, what is the dynamic between you and your partner that you're being open with? And like, if there's security, or there's like a lot of deep trust and deep connection and fulfillment, then those feelings just don't arise as much, because you know what you have.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a safety in that. And you feel confident with what you have. So yeah. So for me, I feel like having witnessed it and experienced it and felt like our relationship's gone deeper and gotten better. Yeah.
And do you feel like, I know obviously you can't speak for him really, but do you feel like there's been a similar shared experience, at least relationally, in your relationship with him?
Yeah, definitely. It was a lot. There were a lot more emotions that came up in the beginning, like the first year. We like really rode some waves of anxiety, and he had a lot of anxiety to work through at times. And at this point, it's like, it's very, very minimal and not even there sometimes. So it seems to just get easier and easier for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey, nice work.
Yeah. So that's a good news, I think, if you're like really working on your relationship and working on yourself and doing all that stuff, like it does get easier. And I think it is like a skill that you build and a muscle that you build. There's a whole like skill set, I feel like, related to polyamory that you just can't learn anywhere else other than doing it.
Just doing it. Like you have
and studying it.
You have to build those muscles. It's like if you go to the gym for the first time and you've never worked out your back or your arms or whatever, it's going to be probably pretty hard at first. And you might get sore and it might hurt and you might need to take a break. And then eventually, with some more intentionality, it can become easier. And then you can actually find joy in the process, possibly, if that's something you even want to do, Yeah. And I've heard a lot of people say, oh, polyamory destroyed their relationship, or polyamory ruined their relationship, or poly this, poly that, whatever. My theory on that is generally that no, polyamory or openness actually just catalyzed the discovery of other things that were not working well in their relationship. Because that seems to be an effect of opening a relationship, is that it exposes your wounds and your triggers to more possibilities of being activated.
Yes.
And then shit comes up.
Yes.
It's easy to say, oh, it's because we're poly, but maybe it's because if you're in a monogamous relationship, that can sometimes be a shelter from and an escape mechanism from really actually facing some of the deeper attachment wounds or insecurities that might exist within.
It absolutely. Yes, I agree. Yeah, you said it.
Yeah. So everybody go out and try to have 5 partners tomorrow.
And just let the shit hit the fan and dive in. Yeah. I mean,
that's a joke.
Yeah.
Just in case anyone actually thinks that was a serious statement, it's a joke.
No, I like what you said about your relationship and, you starting and building a strong foundation and then kind of moving into it with more slowness. Obviously, we started our relationship open, but there were times when we would pace in certain ways, in the internal of our relationship. And there's different ways to kind of pace the onslaught of new emotions and, having certain boundaries in different ways. And so that you have enough spaciousness and regulation, nervous system regulation, to be able to keep your relationship functioning and healthy. And my partner's really good about communicating that with me. And I think I'm good about communicating that with him too, when we're feeling a sense of overwhelm. And we try not to put limits on the other person in how they express their relationships, but more about like, I'm needing a certain amount of space around processing right now. Like I need to take a week break around like talking about this particular issue, or spatial boundaries. Like there was a period where he was like, I just need like a month or two where you don't have a date in the house that we share. Like, can we do it? Or when I'm not home, or there was a feeling of like an invasion of space that he was working through, but he was not trying to hold on to that forever. He was just like, my nervous system needs a break. And so, yeah, I think there are lots of little ways to kind of slow things down or titrate or create enough space and ease that you can get through it, because there are some hard parts. So yeah, I think polyamory destroys a relationship, or like opening can put a lot of pressure on a relationship. Yeah, because like you said, it's going to open up any existing issues. It's going to bring up a whole new set of problems you've never had to deal with before. And it takes time to like regulate and figure out how to do that in a way that's sustainable and fun and like nourishing. And
for sure. And just because somebody experiences emotions or anger or frustration or sadness doesn't mean that it's not going well.
No.
Or going the direction that it needs to go.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah.
That's a big one that I still like wrestle with a little bit internally.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to talk about it a little bit, because there's some people, and I've fallen into this, have the thought of like, oh, well, if I'm sad or mad, it means it's not good and it should stop, But I think in this context, there's maybe something else going on. It seemed like you wanted to say something before I jumped in there. Is that accurate?
I have a bunch of thoughts, but
Go for it if anyone's on top.
Oh gosh, what was I just think? Let me grasp the thought.
Okay, I kind of lost it. I can run with this for a second then. So yeah, I guess there's this piece around, just because somebody experiences challenging emotions in the context of open relating doesn't mean what's happening is actually bad.
Yes. Okay. And I picked up the thread that I had. Yeah. And I think that's true in any relationship, but definitely in a polyamorous dynamic. And I've had people in my life at times, just little funny interactions. And I'm like, that's funny the way people think, where people assume, well, you're poly. So like, what do you, I just didn't think that you got jealous or that you had those feelings or, like if I have jealousy, if I have a boundary issue with another woman, if fear comes up that there's something wrong, or they're like surprised, because I think some people equate poly to meaning you're somehow you somehow don't have all the normal spectrum of human emotions that other people have, and if you do, then there's something wrong, or you can't do it, or you really shouldn't. See, poly really doesn't work,
or it's just a phase, you'll get over it. Kind of.
Yeah, I think it's really important to speak to all that. And what kind of emotions were you wanting to speak to that you feel like have come up?
Let me ask this question. Say, for example, in your relationship, either one of you does something with somebody else and the other person experiences an emotional response. Do you find that it's useful for you in the context of your relationship to then console or reassure each other about that activity? Or is it useful to kind of diversify how you get those reassurance needs met as well? Does that make sense? Like, say my girlfriend interacts with another guy and I feel sad or jealous about it. And I feel a little salty when I interact with her. Like, I could see an instance in which it would be useful for her to give me reassurance But I could also see a situation where it would be useful for me to not put that emotional labor on that scenario and like maybe get support externally, because it's all within the realm of our agreements, and
Yes.
I'm curious about
Yes.
being intentional with where we get support, right,
Yeah.
is the question. I'm wondering if you navigate that intentionally in some way.
Yeah, I love that question. Yeah, I think both. I definitely think reassurance, regular reassurance from the people that you're relating with in a deep way is essential nourishment for the relationship. Genuine reassurance, not like placating, but true like expressions of your devotion or love or desire for the other person. Reminders. Sometimes you just need your partner to ground you and say like, we're doing great. I think our relationship's really good. And, simple things like that. Or you're beautiful, or I think you're so attractive, or I love you, whatever. It's simple things that are genuine.
So it sounds almost like the challenging emotion or whatever could become a catalyst or an opportunity for connection even, and an opportunity for growth.
Yeah. Yeah. And an appreciation. Yeah. Deeper appreciation. So I would say, yes, getting reassurance from your partner, giving to each other the reassurance frequently, just as a source of nourishment to the relationship. And also, yes, I think there comes a point where if that's not working, if that's not doing it, and one of us is like anxiously seeking, like there's this kind of hungry ghost where you just can't get the satisfaction no matter how many times they say, yes, I really want to be with you still, or my feelings haven't changed, but your nervous system or your thoughts are just like you can't get out of that yucky feeling. That's when I feel like it is a time, and it's always good to do this anyway, but it's for sure a sign that I feel that some other nourishment needs to get provided through other resources. And that could be like a personal practice, like reconnecting with a personal practice, yoga or meditation or exercise or something that's fulfilling, but also other relationships, other connections, friendships, and like realizing that, getting filled up in other ways and other connections. So there's some kind of like gap that you're feeling in your fulfillment, and it's kind of on us to go find that. So yeah.
To me, that's one of the beautiful things about, we'll call it non-monogamy instead of polyamory, is just your opening.
We can call it polyamory.
Yeah, opening with the understanding that we've already talked about, that poly could mean 10 different things to 5 different people, But within the context of non-monogamy, you're really creating a larger pool from which you can draw from to get all your needs met, and in traditional monogamy, there's so many needs we try to get met from one person. It's like sexual, yes, but emotional, intimate connection, physical touch, care, nurturing, potentially like business partnership if you're buying a house together, financial support, like sustenance. There's so many different things and pressures that can get put on one relationship that I personally enjoy diversifying that.
Oh my gosh.
And being intentional with that. Even if I'm sexually monogamous, like you could call it emotionally open. I don't even know if that's the right term, because I think we should all be more emotionally open than we actually are. But being able to get needs met from other people is just a very useful thing than to put 30 needs on one person.
So much pressure. It puts so much pressure, so much unnecessary pressure. Yeah. And thank you for mentioning that, because I think one of the reasons I wanted to say non-monogamy is because that just opens up so many more possibilities. Yeah. Because people can be sexually monogamous or sexually with one person, but then maybe they have cuddles or kisses, or they do things with their partner. They go to play parties, or they just have deep emotional connections with people of the opposite sex, which in traditional monogamy isn't really often, is like really frowned upon and not even allowed.
Some people are like, oh, you went on a walk and you had a talk with somebody of the opposite gender. you fucking cheated, you asshole. Like,
Mhm.
seriously.
Yeah.
Woof.
God forbid they're attractive, you
Right.
know, or single. Whew, that's definitely not allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes. Go ahead.
I think just speaking to the spectrum is helpful, and normalizing that there are so many different options out there for this. And just to use my own personal relationship as an example, what we've done primarily for the past few years is that we're open to and able to and agree to, if we're at a container like a sex party, play party sort of a thing, or a workshop that's about sex or relationships or something, we're open to connecting with other people in those spaces, either individually or together. And then we're open to like small group scenarios with other people, but we haven't pursued, for the most part, in-depth one-on-one connections with other people.
Yeah.
My partner has. I haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
And I think that's on the horizon. But just want to name, there's a whole spectrum in between the word monogamy and polyamory.
Yes.
And there's like 50,000 possibilities in between there.
50,000. Yeah. There's so many shades, and you can pick the shade that you want at that time that works for you and try it out, and then move wherever you want on the scale, given how you're feeling, how you're growing, what direction things are moving in, how much time and energy you have, how your sex drive is changing or expanding or not. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
That other like alternative and an option. Yeah. And there are many.
Lots of alternatives.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I had dated someone at some point who was really more into being polysensual. So really wanted the freedom to have really deep cuddles and, you know, kisses and emotional and spiritual connections with other people, but really didn't want to be polysexual, really didn't want to have multiple sexual partners. They felt for them that was too complex, too much to navigate. They really preferred just having the one partner to have the sexual relationship with. And I really respect that. And I really feel like it was a genuine thing that felt right for that person at that time. And I was really clear that I wanted the sexual openness too. And I think it was a really kind of mature move that we were able to have that clarity of conversation and not try to change the other person, and just be like, okay, that's where you're at. That's what you're available for. And that's what you want. This is what I want. And we weren't able to make it align at that time. There were other factors involved, but yeah, it's been cool for me to really learn all these different versions. And I feel a lot of openness in myself to all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that.
And freedom also for myself to change. You know, right now, the style that I'm doing, it really resonates with me. It really works for me. And it's something that I see myself continuing to do. But I'm also really open to it changing. I'm open to getting to a place where I'm like, oh, I really just want to have, I don't know. Yeah. Any way that it could possibly look.
Yeah.
I'm open to, because we change. Yeah.
We do. I remember I was at a gathering last fall, and it was late in the night, and I think there were maybe 4 or 5 of us couples sitting around a fire, and all of us were in some form of a non-monogamous configuration, and we were sitting around kind of lamenting the lack of word choices, or feeling like it's either non-monogamy or monogamy or polyamory, and none of them mean anything that we can all agree on. And somebody said, you know, I really like to use the term dynamic relating in our relationship. And everybody's head around the circle nodded and eyes lit up when we were all like, whoa, yeah, that's cool.
I like that.
Dynamic relating. It's dynamic. It's different. It's potentially changing. It can ebb and flow with things. And that was a word that I really liked, because it's true. There's so many different options and spectrums and things, different ways people could do it.
Yeah.
So we're closing up here on the hour, but I wanted to ask you one more question.
Okay.
And this came up in the interview with Kenya from a few episodes ago. And she was talking about how she doesn't have boundaries with her partners. And it brought up some interesting questions between my partner and I. And I'm curious, you mentioned something around this earlier in this conversation, but do you both have boundaries around what each other can or can't do? And do you think that's a healthy and useful thing for your relationship style?
Ooh, great question. I would say on the simplest answer would be no, we don't.
You don't have boundaries.
Yeah. You could classify some of our agreements as a kind of boundary, but we don't have boundaries as to what we can and can't do with other people. We have agreements around communication, like that we'll communicate before being intimate with each other. We'll keep each other in the loop. Like we actually have a high level of communication where we really want to know how things are progressing and how things are developing. And also, you know, I've been in other countries and had a lover and told him when I got home. And it was totally okay. And it was something we had previously discussed also, that we really preferred to have in-person conversations and to not have like a text conversation that's like, hey, you know, and that's not really a common thing for me to just have something more spontaneous like that, but it did arise. And we had already discussed that as something that could happen. And it's an example of just that anything can happen. And there's not really, we don't have to like talk before we do something. It's not like we have to, or there's only certain things that we can do. We're really free to do whatever we want. And we just, communication is really the key. And we're allowed to communicate if something doesn't feel good or is challenging. Totally. Like that's allowed, but to limit or control how the other person is relating is not something that we've chosen. And yeah, it's been hard at times. I mean, I think there have been moments where I've been like, yeah, my anxiety is coming up and I want that boundary, you know, like, let's talk about boundaries. And then we talk through it and we kind of get back to a place where we feel like we prefer that openness and freedom. And usually when I'm wanting that, for me, it's because I'm anxious and I'm having some fear come up, insecurity within myself. And once that settles and resolves and I've gone to a really nice regulated place with my partner again, and which these days happens pretty quickly, maybe a day at most or something, sometimes a little longer depending on how intense something feels. I'll be back to when I'm in my grounded, regulated place. That's what resonates for me the most. Yeah. And that's what I want. You know, I want that freedom. So I want that for him too.
Yeah. Thanks for speaking to that. It's something I'm curious about. Like what is the impact of having that freedom on the relationship? Yeah, go for it.
We do have one boundary.
Yeah.
I forgot to say. We have one very boundary that we've agreed to.
Are you open to sharing it here?
Yes, I'll share it. We live in a little community on some land with some tiny houses, and there's 8 of us living there. And the boundary we agreed to when we first started was to not date our housemates. And it was like an individual thing that we both wanted. And then we just felt like, yeah, this makes sense. But we've also said, if it really felt like something that really was so aligned and important to explore, we'd be open to talking about it.
Yeah.
But there's just a general agreement that we're not going to do that. And that could change, but that's been the case from the beginning. And it is one that we've kept, for a lot of reasons.
Totally. Even beyond the poly non-monogamy dynamic. It's like this dangerous to have sex with your housemates.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Whew. Yeah. And home is like a place of safety and restoration, and relationships can be disruptive and chaotic and exciting, right? But sometimes even the excitement, that new relationship energy, can be destabilizing.
For sure.
So for me, coming home and feeling grounded and feeling that peace, like I need that in order to have a balanced life. So yeah, it was kind of like, let's not bring that into our living space. if we can help it.
That makes a
Now,
lot of
if we all
sense.
lived on like 300 acres and they were like 100 acres over, that might be a little different, but we live on 3 acres. So
For sure.
it's a little too small.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. The question around, I don't know, there's just a lot of different moving pieces with that, like the personal sovereignty to do whatever feels most life-giving. And then how does that support the relationship that I have with this person and how that all interplays. I'm not even sure how to talk about it exactly. That's just something I'm in curiosity about. I don't consider myself to be a polyamory even close to expert or coach at all. So I'm like in inquiry. I want to ask some other people about this.
How do boundaries feel to you, Taylor? Because you have some, right?
Yeah, we do have some. And I'm in question around them. I mean, they feel like they give me safety.
Yeah.
You know, they feel like they give me safety. And I think for where we are in our relationship right now, they're useful.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder sometimes if they're also not a crutch in a sense of like it's keeping us from potentially living the life that we might actually really fully want to live, that therefore might allow our relationship to thrive even more.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the philosophical hypothetical, but I don't know.
It's so hard to know. Yeah. I think a boundary by definition, it limits possibilities, which isn't a bad thing too.
Totally.
And the thing with not having any boundaries is there are infinite possibilities of what could unfold or develop.
Yeah.
And that requires a high degree of adaptability. And I think it's like spiritual work to continuously surrender and let go and trust what's unfolding. And yeah, it can be, it's very much a stretch. It's a deep stretch for a lot of parts. And I'm in question about it too sometimes. I mean, I'll be honest, like, I'm not like, yes, this is the way to do it. And boundaries are limiting and bad. And you're going to transcend that level. Like, right. I think there could be a wisdom to that too, because sometimes bringing things in a little closer gives you freedom in certain ways. Yeah, there's less possibilities of what could happen. And so you don't necessarily have to adapt to those potential possibilities, even mentally. And there's a mental gymnastics to knowing that anything's possible. You're like, well, how would this work? Or how would that work?
Yeah.
So the boundaries kind of give you a limit to what's possible. And then you can imagine and create within that. So it's a different approach. And my approach is a little bit more like, let's take the boundaries off and let what is organically wants to arise just come through. And if we're doing the work on our relationship and on ourselves, the most aligned thing is going to continuously show up. And if I'm really present in what's alignment and in alignment in each moment, I'm going to know, how to follow that and how to attune to that. And it's a little more, living a bit more wide open, for sure. But I've enjoyed it so far. There's an excitement to it and a creativity, I think, like that's possible also.
It sounds like you also have a commitment to your relationship with your partner at some level, possibly different than a certain kind of monogamous commitment. But I wonder, I'm just curious. Like, do you feel committed to your partner?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though even while you both have these other explorations.
Yeah, totally. And it's
beautiful.
Cool to kind of test that sometimes and might like see it come up and then be like, just continue to feel clear about it.
Yeah.
So I do feel a commitment. I feel that he has one too. And I'm also of the mindset that if a relationship is no longer like really resonant anymore, that it's okay to shift. But there's a commitment kind of in the relationship, and there's a security for me in our dynamic of feeling like no matter how it changes, whether we're romantic partners for the rest of our lives or some other configuration, like I'm committed to the love between us. And I feel like that friendship will persevere. That connection, that deep love will persevere regardless of how it evolves. So I feel committed to that and to the health and integrity of the connection. And that's another beautiful thing about being poly, like, or being open, is like, if some quality of the dynamic shifts, like, I mean, so far so good, like, so far things have just continued to grow. But I've heard relationships where they deeply love the person, but after 10 or 20 years, the sexual chemistry has just changed. Their bodies changed. Maybe they had a kid and something about the pheromones shifted, hormones. And I remember first reading that and being horrified. I was like, oh God, I don't want that to happen. Or how could you continue to be in a relationship with someone if you're not sexual? But I've really opened and released a lot of that to the point where I'm like, oh, I get it. And I get how it's really about more than sex. It's about real deep relationship and love. And so, yeah, with open relating, if something like that did shift at some point, it's like we can still be together in a certain way. We can still have a partnership, a deep relationship, or a deep love. It doesn't have to look a specific way.
Totally.
In order to be a substantial partnership.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Juno, so much for this conversation. It's been really interesting to, hear your perspective. Thank you for your openness and your rawness and vulnerability and realness and sharing about this topic. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Usually at this point in the episode, I ask where people can find you if they want to learn more, but I'm guessing in this context that's not really applicable. So do you have any closing thoughts or last things you'd like to say?
I guess people could email me if they want, if they have personal comments or questions and they have something they want to ask me. Maybe I could share my email.
Yeah. And we can talk about that offline too, to see if that really feels like a good option or not.
Yeah, you're right. Maybe I should have put my email
Putting your email publicly on the internet is a recipe for, it's interesting experiences.
True. Okay. Scratch that.
Okay, great.
Do I have any other comments? I don't think so. I mean, probably like a billion more on this topic, but for now, I'll just say, thank you for having me.
For sure.
It's been fun.
Round one of the conversation complete for now. Thank you so much for being here. If you liked this episode, please shoot me a message on Instagram or via my email, which is a contact form. I don't put my email publicly out to the world. And let me know. And if you have any other questions or requests for future episodes, let me know as well. And thank you again. And I will see you all next time.
Okay.